All right, so for the ultimate reviews, the way that it works is pretty much any question you would have about it is answered like at the very, very top. So I'll walk you through it, but if like, let's say a week from now, you're like, oh, what did he say about this? 95% of the questions that you could possibly think of, I answer like right there at the very top of it. And so it says, up at the top, it says required 4 pages to equal 1 summative or 2 formative grades, your choice. So it's still graded just like regular old test review, voluntary homework, it's quantity. So it has to be on topic, but I don't go through and grade it like I'm grading a test. I grade it like I grade all voluntary homework. So you're answering the questions, you're in the ballpark, cool. So it says required 4 pages to equal. It says students are required to complete 2 doses. So a dose is 4 pages. And you're like, what do you mean by 4 pages? It says down there a little bit farther. Actually, it's probably easiest if I just pull this up digitally. So let me put a digital copy on the board so you can see exactly where I'm talking about. Let's see. Reviews. Ultimate review. All right. So up here at the top of it, the only difference between this and voluntary is that it is required. Part of it is required. So students are required to complete 2 doses. The dose is 4 pages of answers in average size, average spaced handwriting. If you write bigger, that's fine. You just might have to write a little bit more. Since you're going to do 2 doses, that'll be 8 pages total, and that's like your answers. So you might be answering 10 questions, and that takes you 4 pages, and the person next to you, they answer 30 questions, and that takes them 4 pages. You're equal because it's just like I grade voluntary homework. It's how much you write for your answers. A dose, the first dose of 4 pages, that's like a front, back, front, back. So front, back is 4 pages. The second dose is 4 pages. Front, back is 4 pages. If you want to go ahead and jot down the due dates in there, I'll pull them back up. So the first one, if you're an even day class like you guys are, but I'm saying this for the video, if you're an even day class, the first one's due on April 19th. If you're an odd day class, it's the 22nd. And then the last one is due basically just right before the AP Bio test. So that's the 14th. If you're odd day, eventually odd gets ahead of even again because of like star testing or whatever. And so if you're an odd day class, it's the 14th. If you're an even day class, it's the 15th. And we're talking about this ultimate review right here. I'll repeat it, but anything you would need to know is like up there in the directions. One thing that's kind of different is it's required. Not all of it's required, but parts of it are required. So again, let me walk through that again. So on the first due date, you have 4 pages of answers due. That's front, back, and you'll get either 100 summative for it, or you'll get 2 100s for formatives. You'll just write at the top what you want. So if you write sum up there, then I'll give you a summative grade. If you want formative grades, then write formative at the top, and I'll count it as formative grades. So that's kind of nice. The second dose, that's the one that's due right before the AP Bio test. Same thing. I could use it as 1 summative grade or 2 formative grades. So you let me know. On this, I don't take typed ones. There's a couple of you guys that are, I have a couple of students that type everything, so that's like in your, kind of like a modification for you, so that's fine still, of course. But otherwise, a lot of students will kind of like copy, paste, and that's not good. So because of that, I only take handwritten ones. If there's some weird exception, let me know. If somebody breaks their writing hand, whatever. Of course, I'm logical. And as far as, well, what do we have to do? This is super long. Whatever you want. So, like, you can start with Unit 1 stuff. Or you might be like, hey, I'm strong on Unit 1. I don't want to do that. Okay, start right there. Or start right there, or start right there. Just kind of like label and number your stuff. So if you're going to do enzyme questions 2, 3, 4, 5. So, oh yeah, sure. She's right over here. So if you wanted to do like question 2, 3, 4 under enzymes, cool. Just right out to the side like enzymes, and then like number 2, number 3, and number 4. So you can skip around if you want. If I was you, the most important stuff is in like bold. So this reviews like everything from the whole year, but the most important stuff is in bold. So what's more likely to be on the AP Bio test? The stuff in bold. So some students just kind of skip around and do the bold stuff. So again, I might start back here, and I'll just be like, all right, I'm going to do question 2. Oh, you're welcome. Question 2, because that's in bold, and question 4, and like question 5, and 7, and 8. So again, I'm grading based off of quantity. Let's say that you turn those in, and you're like, hey, I'd still like some other voluntary assignments. After that, after all the stuff that's officially due, you can still do it, just like anything else. Voluntary homework. Post it. There you go. So just like any other time that there's a review, it's voluntary homework and it's formatives. So twice you can use it for summative if you want. And then after that, it's just like regular old voluntary homework. That kind of makes sense. And basically, whenever you want to turn it in, you can turn it in. Again, the times when it's actually due is, if you're watching the video, and you're a even day class, do the 19th, the first one, and an odd day class, the 22nd. And then the second installment is right before the AP test, the 14th or the 15th, depending on whether you're even or odd. And again, anything after those 8 pages is just regular old formatives. So what kind of questions do you have? Again, most of it is up at the top. So if you're like, hey, now when you say 4 pages, what does it mean? Well, it says that up at the top. It says 4 pages, like front, back, front, back. All right. Students in the past have said that it's pretty helpful. After the AP Bio test, I'll always ask students, hey, what was most useful? Like, did you use a prep book, like a Cliff's book or a Barron's or a Strive for 5 or anything like that? And if you did, what did you think about it? If you went to the after-school reviews that we did, like, how useful were those? If you did the ultimate review, how useful was that? So, like, start ranking stuff for me. And then that's how I kind of adjust. So most students say that the after-school reviews are the most helpful thing. And then the ultimate review is probably second. Some students really like prep books, and some really don't. So those are very hit or miss. Actually, I haven't had anybody say that it was like a waste of time, but they were kind of like, yeah. Some people are like, oh, I use a prep book all the time for every unit test, and I think it's great. And others are like, time's probably not a total waste, but like time's probably better spent somewhere else. I found that the Barron's book and the Cliff's book seem to be really good. In my opinion, when I look at them, I'm like, yeah, that's very AP-like. Some of the others are hit or miss. If you had one that you got and you brought it in and wanted me to look at it, it'd take me about a minute, and I could be like, yep, that's what it looks like. Or it's like, no, this is some question bank, and these questions are nothing like what they ask on the AP Bio test. So, all right, any questions about ultimate review stuff? All right, so when's the first one due? Right there, the 19th for you guys, since you're my second period class. And then if you're in odd day classes, the 22nd. All right. I think that's it for announcement stuff. So now we'll go over the test. And since it's a test, it'll be a little while. So if you got some math or English homework or something you want to take with you. All right. So oh yeah, actually you too. Yeah, forgot, Grace. So for our multiple choice, let me pause the video here. Like, this is a fact. And then there are things that just by looking at old tests, you're kind of like, hey, here's sort of a trend that I see. So one thing that they tell us is this. So this is just straight off of their website. Not all AP tests are set up the exact same way. So your government test versus your math test versus whatever, they might weight things different. They don't all have the same number of multiple choice. Most AP tests are 3 hours. Not all, but most of them, you get 3 hours total. And it might go slightly over. There's a 10-minute break in the middle, for example. So for hours, you're going to do multiple choice first. I have you guys do free response first in class only so that, like, as you guys are turning those in, I can start grading while you work on multiple choice. So you'll take the multiple choice first. If you have a traditional AP exam, not like art or language, some of the language ones, you have to, like, record yourself talking, so that's kind of non-traditional. But otherwise, if your test has multiple choice and free response, I don't know of any exception, you always do multiple choice first. So you'll get 60 questions, you get 90 minutes, and then they end up weighting it as half of your test score. You get individual questions, and then you get question sets. So a question set is kind of like a lot of the lab-based ones that we've done in the past. So like the test we just talked about, or even if you weren't in here, during that you might remember that we'll have like some scenario, and we might ask you like 4 or 5 questions about it. So those. What's a little bit different about the real AP Bio exam compared to some of ours is they just get a little bit wordier. So I try to make my unit tests follow them as much as possible, but I also try to make my unit test like less about reading comprehension, so I have to kind of compromise. It's a little bit more reading comprehension and speed reading heavy. So as we go through there, they typically have like 4 or 5 question sets. So that means like maybe 20 questions on the test, so almost a third of the test is in these groups. So whenever we take our first mock exam, that will give us strategies. So one of the things that we'll do in our mock exam is we'll time it at true AP speed. And what I'll do is I'll be like, all right, as we're going along, I'll be like, all right, you got like a minute left. So up at the top of your test, write down how many multiple choice you got through, or like how many short you're going to be. You might be like, I've got a minute left. I've got 8 unanswered questions. So up at the top, I'd say 8. And then I'm going to go ahead and bubble in randomly like A, B, C, B, A, whatever. But after mock exam 1, I might realize, hey, I'm going to be short like 8 questions. All right, later on, we take mock exam 2. So if you take mock exam 1 right here, I kind of make a mental note like, hey, I was short 8 questions. Whenever we take mock exam 2, maybe I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. And maybe I improve a little bit. Maybe this time I'm short 4 questions. If I'm going to not finish the test, if I don't finish this one on time and I don't finish this one on time, I'm not going to finish the real one on time either. So now I have a strategy. If I'm going to finish the test, cool. Just read everything, do everything, great. If you're not going to finish the test, then you start to have a strategy. If I'm going to be short like 1 question, whatever. If I'm going to be short like 4 or 5, now my strategy is when I open up that test, somewhere in there, usually right in the middle of the multiple choice, one of those question sets that has like 4 or 5 questions with it is insanely large. Like it'll be 2 pages before they ask you anything. So they'll be like, here's a pedigree. Here's a paragraph. Here's a pedigree. Here's another paragraph. Here's a picture of like an electrophoresis gel. On the next page, here's a data table. Here's a little bit of information about it. Page 3. Now we're going to start asking you questions. Well, if I know that I'm going to have trouble finishing that test on time, and I know I'm going to be short like 4 or 5 questions, I basically just guess on the biggest question set. So my strategy going in is like, I'm not going to finish, but I'm going to control where I spend my time. So when I'm cruising along and I get to number 20, and I'm like, holy freaking crap, this is insane. A, B, D, C, and I move on. If I'm going to be short 8 questions, I'm going to skip 2 of the question sets. So if I'm running out of time, then I skip the stuff that has like tons of graphs and tons of reading. That makes sense, right? So the reason we do 2 mock exams is so you can kind of figure out your strategy. Keep in mind, if you're like, hey, it was hard to finish that test, if you're like, hey, I was short a few questions, do you think it's the same way like throughout the U.S.? Yeah. What about Fossil Ridge where I used to teach? It's even tougher there. I've got more non-native English speakers. So my readers were a little bit slower when I taught there. So they're even less likely to finish the test on time. So if you're like, holy crap, I didn't finish. Yeah, you and like half of the world. So don't worry about it. Just go in with a strategy of like, I'm going to be short a few questions. All right, for free response. It's 6 questions. 2 of them are long. That's what you're used to taking. So all the free response that I'm always giving you on tests that are worth like 9 or 10 points, that's what their long ones are like. Their long ones are always 8 to 10 points. And if you recall, anytime we take a free response on our test, it's always like 9 or 10 points. So that's what you're used to. You'll get 2 of those, and then you get 4 of them that are 4 points each. What's a 4-point question look like? Well, do we sometimes have like a part B that's worth about 4 points for us? They'd have that, only it'd be a whole question. What's different? They'd have like stuff to read before you get there. So here's what they say. What will the free response cover? And on the long questions, a student is asked to interpret and evaluate experimental results. So you know how sometimes we have data tables or graphs and you have to like interpret what they mean? That's what they mean. Interpret and evaluate experimental results with graphing. That means you will draw a graph, guaranteed. They've literally said you are going to have to draw a graph, and that graph will be worth 3 points. So, and it's going to be question number 2. The short answer questions will be a scientific investigation, and you're like, kind of vague. Conceptual analysis, a little bit vague. Analysis of a model or visual representation. That means there's going to be some kind of drawing or picture. It might be nerve cells talking to each other. It might be a food web, whatever. And then data analysis. So conceptual analysis is like straight content. That's like, how does a mitochondria make ATP? Scientific investigation, they'll kind of give you some background and you have to like have a little bit of science knowledge. So here's what they tell us for sure. All right. The current version of AP Biotest, this is the 4th year of it. So the way this is set up like this setup changes every once in a while. And so we've had this same setup in 2021, 22, 23, and then now you guys are the 4th year. So that means I have 3 old tests of free response I can look at and look for trends. And so here's what I found. This is where you kind of separate for test prep. This is where you separate like a better AP Bio teacher that's paying attention versus one that's just like, yeah, I teach biology. All right, so I went back and I recently, like a couple days ago, just started like taking notes over what they asked. What does question 1 look like in 2023? What about 2022? What about 2021? Because they've been running, again, we have 3 years of this version of the test. What about question 2? What about the 4-point questions? And here's what we find. For free response question number 1, it usually looks intimidating, very intimidating. I'll give you an example. And when it looks intimidating to you, it looks intimidating to everybody else as well. So what you'll want to do is you have to decide if you think that Timber Creek AP Biology is solid or is it like crap. Kind of like AP US History, like the reputation of that is like Roach is a really good teacher. Is it hard? Is it easy? You can debate whatever, but like Roach is a good AP US History teacher. You'd be like, hey, I put him up against just some rando at some other school for sure. That's a slam dunk, sure thing. So, if you look at something and it looks scary, if I'm any good at my job, that means that it looks scary to other people also. So let me kind of show you what last year looked like. All right, so they always give you a formula sheet. And before too long, I'll copy them and let you see it. They give you a scary looking formula sheet and you're like, holy crap, do I use all that? No. 70% of this formula sheet you've never used ever on the AP Bio test. You've never had to calculate the mean or the standard deviation. You have had to calculate chi-square. There's a chi-square table. You've never had to use these laws of probability other than logic. We have used Hardy-Weinberg. sometimes it might be useful to know that 10 to the negative 1, or what does 10 to the negative 9 mean, or something like that. But most of this you don't need. Again, we've never had to calculate population growth or exponential growth or logistical growth. Rate's fair game, rise over run. So they'll give you a formula sheet. In the directions, like I was saying earlier, read each question carefully. These are what the directions are going to look like for you. Read each question carefully and completely. Answers must be written out in paragraph form. Outlines, bulleted lists, or diagrams alone are not acceptable. They're not picking on your grammar. So if you're writing in paragraph form and then all of a sudden you've got a couple of bullet points, they're still going to grade them. What they're trying to do is, normally when people write in bullet points, they write incomplete thoughts. And so it doesn't get you credit. In reality, if you wrote sentences and just happened to put dots next to it, they would give you credit. They're just looking for like complete ideas. So, can you use diagrams? Sure. But a diagram alone isn't acceptable. So here was question 1 last year. Then they start asking me stuff. Now, I have to do question 1 in 22 minutes if I'm going to be on time. So that's why students that are taking longer, you're not going to finish unless you make yourself go faster. So for some of you guys, that's because you're too picky. You're like, I want to thoroughly. It's like, no. You've got a certain amount of time, write as much as you can, write the most important stuff, and then like move on. Question 2. Close, not quite as intimidating. They tell me I'm going to have to graph some stuff, so they give me a data table. Definitely doesn't look as bad. Here's what a 4-point question looks like. It's very clear. A, B, C, D, 1, 1, 1, 1. So if they say state a null hypothesis, is like, are you asking me to write one sentence? Yeah. What you generally find, it's not perfect, but you generally can figure out how many points they're giving you based off of like what's highlighted. So for example, it doesn't show up that well right here, but it says, that's in bold. It says, describe the effect of the law. Explain how this could work. Identify a dependent variable. Justify using wild type strain. Justify this based on the table. Identify this. Calculate this. Predict this. Justify this. So you can almost be like, I can tell exactly where all the points are. The reason that matters is if I said, hey, explain how mitochondria make ATP. And you'd be like, all right, is this a 1-point question or a 10-point question? If it's a 10-point question, I've got a lot of crap to write. If it's a 1-point question, I'm going to kind of summarize something in like a sentence or two. So kind of keep that in mind. As we go through the test, here's what we notice. Here's what we notice. Pre-response question number 1. Part A is pretty much always 2 points of just straight up biology content. Like, do you know, like, what makes ATP the energy molecule for all living things? You'd be like, well, the phosphates are negative, they repel each other, so it's unstable. That kind of thing. Just straight up, do you know biology or not? Like if you hadn't taken... When I say biology content, that's the type of thing where like if Miss Skoll, who's brilliant, took this test, part A, she might not get any points. She'd be like, I don't remember, like I didn't have to learn anything about ATP synthase. I don't know what that is. Part B, 3 points for experimental design. They're going to ask you to identify either the independent variable, the dependent variable, controls, or constants. Then they're going to ask you, why was this or that included? So I'm going to walk you through that here in just a minute. Part C, based on your data, which was the highest one, or which was the lowest one, or which was the best one, or whatever. It's basically just like reading the data. So pretend that I was checking to see which fertilizer was best for plants. And there's all this data. Eventually they're like, so which one was the best? And then they're going to have you calculate something. And then for part D, they're going to come up with something different. They're going to be like, all right, pretend that we set up a brand new experiment. What would happen if? That kind of thing. So let me walk you through what some of this might look like. As far as these review days, you can write stuff down if it seems to help. You can take pictures of whatever if it seems to help. Ask questions, just whatever seems to work for you. Again, almost 90% of students in here and across the 5 AP Bio classes signed up for the AP Bio test. So for most students, like, it's pretty important. If you're that other 10% and you're like, hey, I don't care about this at all. I realize it might help me for the mock exams coming up, but like I've been accepted in my university, I'll probably be fine. If you quietly work on math or whatever, that's fine. But even if you're not taking the real AP test, this does help you for like our mock exams. Okay, here I had one other student that was gone. All right, so let's say that I've got an experiment. We'll do a simple one. I might have even done one kind of like this in class before. I do this with my 9th grade students. Let's say I want to do an experiment and I'm trying to do like this experimental design. And free response question number 1, they've always, every year, had me identify the independent variable or dependent variable or control or constants. And then they have me justify something from it. Along the way, down here in part 2, they sometimes even have me like identify an independent variable or a dependent variable or something like that. So I've got these 4 things. I've got constants, independent variable, dependent variable, control. All right, so pretend that I'm going to test like fertilizers. I want to see which one's best. I've got these pots that I'm going to grow some plants in, and I've got Walmart fertilizer. I've got Lowe's fertilizer, and I've got Home Depot fertilizer. All right, cool. So I'm going to set up an experiment, and I want to see, again, which type of stuff is best to help my plants grow, which fertilizer is best. And the Walmart stuff is cheaper. Home Depot is like 30 bucks. Lowe's is like 31 bucks. And Walmart is like 20 bucks. So I'm hoping that it performs equal to or really, really close, and I can save some money. What would examples of constants be in this experiment? Yeah, so I better use the same species of plant. I don't want to plant like an oak, an apple, and a pear tree or something like that. So constants, same plant. Constants, plural. In the past, if they had you design an experiment, you had to list 2 or more. They wanted you to realize that it wasn't just one thing. So what's another thing? Lucas. Yeah, water, sunlight, etc. So everything that they get should be exactly the same. Same pots, same amount of dirt, same types of seeds, the same plant. They get the same amount of sunlight, same amount of sun. I put them all on that back window so they're all exposed to sun at the same time of day, same temperature, same everything. Everything is constant. Everything is identical. Except what? Yeah, the fertilizer type. So what is my fertilizer type? It's not a constant. It's my independent variable. So in this example, it'd be my fertilizer type. And this is how they approach experimental design on the AP Bio test. They don't ask you, define an independent variable, define a dependent variable, and then somebody looks it up on Google and they're like, a dependent variable depends on the independent variable, and we're like, thanks. they'll be like, here's a scenario. What is the independent variable in this experiment? Or what is the dependent variable in this experiment? All right, so fertilizer type. Did I get the Walmart brand, the Lowe's brand, or the Home Depot brand? All right, cool. What's my dependent variable? Yeah, how much it grows. Like, how do I decide which one is best? And I need to be specific. I might be looking for the one that makes the plants grow the tallest. Or it's Texas. Maybe what I think is best is the one that has the best root system, the most broad root system, so it's potentially more drought resistant. Maybe I'm a florist, whatever. I'm a plant person. I'm a plant seller. And I care about like how many flowers this rose bush produces or something. So it might be the number of roses. But a dependent variable is like what I measure. It's what I measure. And I want to be specific. So it might be height. It might be the mass. It might be the number of leaves, whatever. So I would be specific. How do I know which one is best? Kind of like athletes. I'm like, well, which athlete is best? And I'm like, I don't know. Strongest? Fastest? Throws the farthest? Can run the longest? What do you mean best? And then we're like, well, the fastest. Okay, well, let's go to the track team. You know, where are the athletes that are the strongest? Okay, well, we'll go to the powerlifting team. Which ones can jump the highest? Again, track and basketball. Like, what do you want? So dependent variable is something I measure. And then what's missing in my experiment? Let's say that these things grow, and they grow like this. So I let them grow for however long, I don't know, 2 months, and this is what sprouted up. So which one out of those three appears to be the best if I'm going for height? Walmart's. I'm like, hey, it's the cheapest one also. However, what's wrong with my experiment? I don't have a control. That one gets no fertilizer, which cost me $0. So before I had a control, you're like, who gives a crap? Walmart's clearly the best. Or was it? My control suggests otherwise. My control suggests that all those fertilizers are actually poison to this particular type of plant. Maybe it's great for Bermuda grass, but it kills this other type of grass. Or maybe it's great for these kind of trees, but not fruit-bearing trees, whatever. Turns out all these are bad, but I wouldn't have known that if I didn't run a control. So a control does not, the easiest way to kind of define it is does not get the independent variable. So it doesn't get the fertilizer. Okay. The likelihood that they ask you this is a guarantee. In 2021, part B of number 1, they asked you about it. In 2022, they asked about it. 2023, they asked about it. It's super weird. Before, the test was just like completely unpredictable. They'd try to mess with you. They'd ask something, then not ask it for a while, then ask it like 2 years in a row. They were always screwing around with you. Now, not only are they like asking the same type of things, they're even asking it on the same question at the same spot. Like it really has been for the last 3 years. They ask it on question 1, part B. On question 2, part B. That's when they're going to tell you to make a graph. Now again, they could change it. They didn't tell us this is where they're going to put it, but last year, the year before, and the year before, all 3 years, it's always been in this order. All right. So control doesn't get the independent variable. You might hear negative control or positive control. Some experiments have them, some don't. A negative control is where you don't get something. A positive control is where you give it something to make sure that it works. So for example, in our bacteria lab, we had a plate where we just gave it some LB broth, and so the LB broth could be like you could consider that like a positive control to make sure that the bacteria was alive and was eating food. A negative control is what you normally think of. The way that you learn the word control in 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade, whatever, is a negative control. I don't get negative. I don't get the independent variable. All right, so now let's go back and look at that crazy 2023 question. I look at all this crap. All right, part A. Describe the effect of the addition of a charged phosphate group can have on a protein that would cause the protein to become inactive. It's an inhibitor. How can adding something to a protein make it inactive? It's an inhibitor. Now, I wouldn't just say it's an inhibitor. I'd describe that, but like you can start talking about like, well, when I add a chemical to something, it changes its shape, and if an enzyme changes its shape, then now it might become inactive, and so that phosphate acted as an inhibitor. Point. Explain how a signal can be amplified during signal transduction. That literally just showed up on our test, right? A protein can activate many proteins, can activate many proteins, can activate many proteins in a signaling transduction pathway. This is just straight up, you either know biology or you don't. Like I was saying before, Miss Skull, I don't know how much biology she did since she was a physics and she might actually be a math major. Maybe a math major, physics minor. But like, if she doesn't know biology, she's brilliant, but she doesn't know this. Then you get to part B. This is where like any science teacher can get some of this. Based on the table, identify a dependent variable in the researcher's experiment. I'm literally just like, what's the dependent variable? So I go to my data table. And even if this looks ridiculous, it's like, well, these are all things I'm measuring. So one of my dependent variables is APase activity in high inorganic phosphate environment, that many micro units per mil per OD6, like I just barf that out. That's my dependent variable. I measured that, I measured that, I measured that, I measured that. So any of those four would be right. I haven't even read the background of the question yet. Justify the researchers using the wild type strain for the creation of mutant strains. I would have to read the question for that, but like, why did they use a wild type strain? Or why did you use this for your control? That type of thing is what it's getting at. Justify the researchers using mutant strains in which only a single component of the pathway is mutated in each strain. So if we read the question, we'll realize they mutated something, collected data, mutated a different thing, collected data, mutated a different thing, collected data, mutated a different thing, collected data. Why didn't we just mutate all four things at once? Why is it in an experiment? Why do I just change one thing? Like here, the only thing I changed was fertilizer type. Why didn't I change the amount of fertilizer? And they all got different amounts of sun, and they all got different amounts of water. Why would that be a bad experiment? Why is it bad if I had like 5 independent variables? Yep, all grow differently. In the end, when this one grows the best, do I know why? Do I know it's the fertilizer? No, it could have been the sun, could have been the water. So if I have one independent variable and this guy grows better or this guy grows better or whatever, I'm more certain that it was due to the fertilizer or the lack of fertilizer. So this looks ridiculous. When you start getting into like what are the answers for this first part, it's actually not that bad, is it? All right. As we're going along, we're going to see more and more of these long kind of reading comprehension ones. So this is the type of stuff that we'll be practicing. When they have you do a calculation, the calculation typically won't be bad. But in part C, you'll have some sort of calculation. So, all right. We're at a stopping point there, and I'll walk you through the ultimate review stuff that I told you about. See you later.